We've considered the Apostle Paul the Philippians. We're going to take a break. We've going to be in Genesis chapter 37. We're going to consider the story of Joseph. When we start our panoramic reading of the Word of God, we normally start in the beginning of the year sometimes, and we go through Genesis, we go to Exodus and Leviticus, and then in Numbers we hit a roadblock sometimes, and most believers stop right there. Now, Genesis is well known to most believers. It's the book of the foundations in our faith. Now, when we come to the story of Joseph, it's a marvelous story. It's a story of the providence of God. It's a story that it touches us in a way that only the Lord Jesus Christ can touch our lives. And when we read this marvelous story, we find that Joseph is a type of Christ. And here, in Genesis 37, the Holy Scriptures record this magnificent story. But before we get into the text, Jacob's family, and all this, the story of Jacob's family, we find from Genesis 29 to Genesis 35. It's like a family album. We see everything that happens there. It was a dysfunctional family. Jacob had 2 wives. He had 2 concubines. He had 12 sons. He had a daughter. And when we consider this, we find a lot of difficulties in this family. We find conflict. We find bitterness. We find hatred. We find selfishness. We find revenge. We find rape. We find incest. We find deceit. We find mass murder. Remember when Dinah was defiled? The sons of Jacob said, we are willing to give you our sister, but you have to get circumcised. And then, when the men of that town were circumcised, in a couple of days, it was really, really painful for them. And the sons of Jacob went in that town and slayed every single man in that town. And here in Genesis 37, and verse 1, we start reading about Joseph. And the Holy Scriptures say the following. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, one of the concubines, and with the sons of Zilpah, the other concubine, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Then, we're diving into the text now. And Joseph comes into the scene. Joseph was the son of Rachel, the wife that Jacob loved. Remember when he goes to Padam Aram, he gets to Laban, and then Laban has 2 daughters, Leah and Rachel. Jacob immediately fell in love with Rachel and worked 7 years to be able to marry her. And then, come wedding night, Laban switches the daughters and he gives them Leah. And then Jacob says, what have you done? I worked 7 years for Rachel. And then he worked another 7 years. He worked 14 years for Rachel. But Rachel could not conceive. Then the Lord remembered Rachel, and she gave birth to the son named Joseph. So Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, the wife that Jacob loved. And then Rachel had a second son, and in the birth of Benjamin, Rachel dies. So Joseph reminded Jacob of Rachel, the wife that he loved. And here, it says that the boy was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, and they were wicked. And then Joseph came to Jacob and gave their report, all the wrongdoings. And if you grew up in a large family, it's no fun when somebody comes and tells on you. When somebody tells your parents what you did wrong. We don't like that. So here is a little tension already. He's coming and telling Jacob what they did wrong. And then in verse 3, it says, "Now Israel," Jacob, "loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors." So here it's out in the open who's the favorite son. It's no secret. Joseph is the favorite son. It's easy when you are the favorite son. It's not easy when you're not. Some of you might relate to this. If you have several children, you might favor one over the other. And then he went to the extent of making him a coat of many colors. What the coat meant was that when everything is said and done, Joseph was going to be the one taking in charge of the family. What that colorful robe meant that it was a coat that a prince will wear. It was a regal robe. Imagine how the other 11 children, not counting Benjamin, 10, how they felt. First, he comes and tells on him. And then Jacob made him a colorful coat, a robe that a prince will wear. Here we find a mistake that we as parents make, and make it often. This is the expression that is used. And I've used it. Everyone who is a parent has used it. I'm going to give my kids what I never had. Okay? In Joseph's case, it's a sin that we see in Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah and Isaac had two sons, twins, Esau and Jacob. Isaac's favorite son was not Jacob. It was Esau. Esau was a rugged individual, an outdoorsman, a hunter. Jacob was in Rebekah's kitchen, learning how to cook. In Isaac's mind, Esau is the man. But now we see the same issue that Isaac had, we see him repeat in Jacob's case. Now he is picking a son, and he makes him a coat, a colorful coat, and it's written in the scriptures that he was the favorite son. In verse 4, it says, "And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him." He was the favorite son. He told on him, so his brothers despised him. They did not like him. They could not speak to him in peace. And then, to make matters worse, Joseph had several dreams, and he shared them with their brothers. It says on verse 5, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said to them, Here I pray you this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheep stood around and made obeisance to my sheaf. Verse 8, and his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? First dream, the sheaf. Second dream, verse 9. It said, and he dreamed yet another dream, and told before his brethren, and said, Behold, I have a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is it, this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee on earth? First he tell him, I have a sheaf, and there was 11 more sheaves, and that you guys' sheaves are going to bow to mine. And then he said there was the sun and the moon and the stars, and 11 stars. And they all bowed to me, including his parents. And even Jacob, his father, rebuked him. At times, when we see this picture, he shared this dream with his brethren. And his brethren even hated him more. They asked him, Are you going to reign over us? Are you going to rule over us? First of all, he was not the firstborn. Reuben was the firstborn. First, he was wearing this colorful robe. He has his father's favor. And he tells them the dream that he's going to rule over them. They're going to all bow to him. And then we see that Jacob sent the boys away. He sent them to a long distance, considering, remember, Jacob settled in Hebron. And he sends the boys, not Joseph, to Shechem, which is roughly 60 miles northeast. It's a long distance to shepherd the flocks that he had. And then he sends Joseph to check on them, see how they're doing. So Joseph, being obedient to his father, gets everything ready and travels roughly around 60 miles from Hebron to Shechem to check on his brothers. And it says on verse 17 of Genesis 37, and the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. So he traveled 60 miles to Shechem. He doesn't find them. And then he travels 12 miles to Dothan, and he finds them. They were away, about 72 miles away. If Joseph would have went to Shechem and not find them there and came back to his father, it would have been okay. Father, I looked for them. I went to you where you told me they would be. They're not there. I'm here. But Joseph, being obedient to his father, traveled another 12 miles, and he finally found them in Dothan. And you would think that Joseph was probably bringing food, drinks. You think of his brothers being happy to see him, but it was the total opposite. Verse 18 says, And when they saw him afar off, even before he came unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. Joseph is happy to see him, and when they see him coming, they say amongst themselves, let's kill him. Let's get rid of his coat. Let's end this once and for all. And we think of that moment when the people who were there to protect this 17-year-old boy, the people that were asked to love him unconditionally, his flesh and blood. We see him that they conspired to kill this young man. He was happy to see him, but on the other side, they were like, okay, this is our chance right here. Let's kill him. And then, verse 21, Reuben, the firstborn, intervenes. And then it said, and Reuben heard it and delivered him out of their hands and said, let's not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. So the oldest reads. He said, no. Don't kill him. Let's throw him in this pit. And then maybe he'll learn his lesson, and then from here, we'll take him back to our father. But a pit was something that the shepherds made. It was formed like a bottle. In the neck, they used to put a rock, and they used to, in the rainy season, collect water for their flocks. Now, you could not get out of the pit by yourself. At this point, it was probably dry. There was no water in it. It was probably mud. So Joseph could not get out of the pit by himself. Imagine what he felt, being in that pit, all by himself. The people who were there to protect him wanted him dead. And they throw him in this pit. And then, on verse 26, Judah says the following. It says, and Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is brother in our flesh. And his brethren were content. So Judah says, you know what? Let's make some money out of this deal. Here come the Ishmaelites. Let's sell them. And get the profit, which in this case was 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. And let's sell them and split the money. Right? He was all hard, huh? And then, in verse 28, then there passed the Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So now, following Judah's advice, they take him out of the pit, and they sell him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and the Ishmaelites take him into Egypt. Out of just luck, the Ishmaelites happened to be there, and they buy him for 20 pieces of silver. Brothers, there's no luck in the Christian life. It was the plan of God all along. The perfect plan of God. His distant cousins come and do God's purpose and take him into Egypt. And they sell him as a slave. Joseph went from being the favorite son to being a slave. Joseph went from being the one who was going to inherit his father's estate to having absolutely nothing. And then the text tells us that he was taken to Egypt. Have you ever asked yourself, why Egypt? The Lord could have taken him anywhere, but he chose Egypt. You've read this text many times. Have you stopped and think, why did God choose Egypt to St. Joseph? The Jewish society was an exclusive society. They did not intermingle with Hebrews. It was an abomination to eat bread with Hebrews. So God wanted his people separate from anybody else. If we would have sent them to Canaan, they would have probably intermingled with the Canaanites. It would have been a shortcut, but not the one that God wanted. He wanted them to go to Egypt. At the time, Egypt was the center of the world. The pyramids were already built. And there's a lot of math involved. We can think of their education. And he was preparing Moses to stand before Pharaoh. And Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace. Coincidence? Absolutely not. You think a slave was going to stand to Pharaoh and demand for Pharaoh to liberate the nation of Israel? Absolutely not. Not in a million years. So it's God's plan all along, and he sends them to Egypt. And there, Joseph is sold to Potiphar. Verse 36, and the Midianites sold him into Egypt, into Potiphar, an office of Pharaoh's, and a captain of the guard. Have you ever asked yourself, why did he get sold to this specific person? First, he gets sold to Egypt. And then, he gets sold to a specific person. We can see in this passage the providence of God in full effect. Brothers, God is in total control. And he began in us a work that he said he will finish. At times, we don't see the hand of God. At times, it's hard for us to see the purpose of God in our lives. And his plan, when we examine the scriptures, is the perfect plan. He got sold to Potiphar because he had to learn the Egyptian aristocracy. He was going to rule in a few years. He was going to be second to Pharaoh only. The perfect plan of God was for him to learn. It was a moment of preparation for Joseph, because in a few years he was going to be the prime minister of Egypt. And he was going to save the world. Known of the time. In our lives, there's always a moment of preparation. God is working in our lives. We can see Moses being prepared for 40 years in the wilderness. We can see David eating at Saul's table, already anointed king of Israel. And he was going to stand and be king. But he had to learn what it was like to be a king. The Lord is always working behind the scenes. The Lord, it will carry out his purposes in us. He's in total control despite what we think. Sometimes we want to take the helm. Sometimes we want to take control. And what happens? We crash. And then we come back devastated. We come back defeated. Why? Because God was not at the helm. We took over. and see what happens. The providence of God in its full display. And then, verse chapter 39, verse 1, it says, And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites. We had brought him down thither. And then the Lord was with Joseph. Here's the key verse. Through it all, in the pit, when he gets sold as a slave, when he goes to Potiphar's house, that says the Lord was with Joseph. And everything that Joseph did, he prospered. And now he goes to this Egyptian's high-ranking official to work in his house. But Potiphar noticed something about Joseph. He noticed that the Lord was with him. He noticed that he was the hard worker. There was no other way. He didn't know Potiphar was but he noticed something different in this man, to the point where he made him in charge of this whole house. Joseph was in charge of the garden. Joseph was in charge of shopping. Joseph was in charge of the cleaning. Joseph was in charge of everything in this man's house. Needless to say, he was probably the best employee this man had. What about us? What about our employment? What about our work ethic? What would our boss say about us? Can we stand and say, you know what, my boss has high regards for me? And, every time I'm on time, I do what I'm assigned, I go above and beyond. But sometimes we forget that we are employed by the Lord Jesus Christ. We have to work when our earthly boss is looking or when he's not looking. We have to perform like it's to the Lord, because it is. And sometimes we're late. We bring a bad attitude. But here we find in this text that this man saw something in Joseph that made him to be the ruler of the house. He was in charge of everything. And then on chapter 39, verse 7, here comes a difficulty. It says that Joseph was tempted. But if you read verse 6, it says that he was, the end of verse 6, and Joseph was a goodly person and well-favored. He was a good-looking man, on top of being a hard worker. So Mrs. Potiphar noticed, okay? And then the text tells us that he was tempted. It says in verse 7, And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth now what is with me in the house, and he had committed all that he had to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. Now, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Mrs. Potiphar noticed that he was a good-looking man, and she asked Joseph to sleep with him, to sleep with her. And what was his answer? How can I do this wicked thing and sin against God? Adultery is a big deal. Adultery can change something forever. Adultery can destroy our lives. Adultery is no different than breaking and entering and stealing. It's a big deal. And when David writes in Psalm 51, he says, I have sinned against thee, O God. When we examine David's life, after he committed adultery, his life was never the same again. The scriptures do not record that God ever spoke to him again. And here, this young man says, how can I do this wicked thing? How can I sin against God and sleep with you? See, the Bible is clear. The Bible teaches us, believers, to flee from temptation and to resist the devil. Those are the instructions, correct? But what do? We do the opposite. We try to resist temptation and we flee from the devil, and we fail on both counts. Adultery doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that is brought in our mind into our heart, and then we sin against God and commit this heinous sin. This went on for many days. And Joseph said, no, 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 and no. Brothers, we have to guard ourselves. We have to pray. We have to run if necessary. Because this is a big deal. When we look at society today, and all the contempt they have towards the Christian life, the first thing they attack is our marriages. Why? Because we have not done a good job. Our marriages sometimes are just the same as a non-believing couple. When the Apostle Paul writes to the believers in Corinth, he says, the sin that is committed in this assembly is something that we don't even hear from non-believers. It's a big deal. Verse 11. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went to the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garments, the Potiphar's wife, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. The woman waited for the perfect moment. There's nobody in the house. She goes inside and strips him nude and says, lie with me. What did he do? He fled. He ran. And then he gets wrongfully accused. I firmly believe that if Potiphar would have known that he was guilty, they would have had him executed. But Potiphar knew that Joseph was innocent. But he had to take into account what the wife has said. And he gets put into prison. When we are accused of something that we have not done, is a difficult time. We were working in downtown Houston, and we were doing a remodeling in the Bank of America building on the 16th floor and the 22nd floor. So I was on the 22nd floor, coming down to the 16th floor. That door of the elevator opens, I come out, and to my surprise, the alarm lever had been pulled, and the alarm is going on. In an occupied building, it's a big deal because the fire department comes, and they charge you a fine, or they charge you an amount for coming because they're using resources. So now everybody's like concerned, and then like, is there a fire going on? What's going on? Did somebody pull the lever and then set the alarm intentionally? So I go inside, and then a little while later, my boss says, Robinson, did you happen to pull the lever of the fire alarm? I said, no. He says, they're saying that you did, and they have it on video. I said, I want to see this video. I haven't done anything. So he goes and meets with them, and they're like, he looks at the video, and the video shows me getting out of the elevator. Nothing else. Because I did get out of the elevator. I didn't pull the lever. And then they want to meet with me, my boss, and the general contractor. So they bring me in and say, well, we see you come out of the elevator. I said, I did. I'm not denying that. And then it says, but the alarm was set right at the moment. I said, I don't know who did it, if somebody did it intentionally. And then my boss stood up, and he said, listen, of all the guys that I have working for me in this building, I will believe that they did except him. And I said, well, David, thanks for believing in me, but I didn't do it. And then they came and apologized and everything, and then I was cleared of any wrongdoing. But it was like they were ready to get me out on the street, terminate my employment. And I was going to be banned for working for the general contractor for years on end. And it was a big account for us. I would have been probably like laid off and fired or whatever it was. And I was like, I didn't do anything. And then I remember like it was yesterday. I get a call from my wife. She's frantic. And she says, you got to come quickly. I am at a Costco parking lot, and they are accusing me of hitting a woman with the car. You got to come now. And I'm on the other side of town. I tell my boss, I come across the whole town like as fast as I could. It was like a 30-minute drive. And when I get there, the police are there, the fire department's there, and then, they're interviewing my wife. And I'm like, what happened? And she's like, well, this person says that I was backing out of the parking spot, and I hit her mother. And I can hear on the phone on my way when this person is cussing at my wife, yelling at my wife, saying all kinds of obscenities. And I get there, and then the cops go, oh, we're going to look at the video, see what happened. And then they come back and said, ma'am, you have nothing to worry about. The car doesn't even come close to hitting this lady. Now we got to go talk to her why she filed a false police report. It's a difficult time when we are accused of something that we did not do. Joseph did not do anything wrong, and he gets put into prison. Being the best employee that he possibly could be, seeing the hand of God on Joseph. And then we can think of this young man saying, here we go again. What about the dreams? What about the purpose of my life? What's going on? I obeyed my father. I obeyed God. And here I am right now in prison for something that I did not do. But in prison, he also didn't let the darkness of the prison enter his heart. He got involved and tried to help in whichever way he could. And the warden of the prison noticed it. He made him in charge of all the prisoners. And then the butler of Pharaoh and the baker of Pharaoh get thrown into prison. Okay? And they had a dream. And then they wanted somebody to interpret their dreams. And what better person, right? Joseph. And he says to the butler, in 3 days, you are going to be restored to your position. And he tells the baker, in 3 days, you're going to be home. And just like he said, it came to pass. And then we find in chapter 40, verse 14 and 15, a little bit of agony in Joseph. It says, but think of me when it shall be well with thee, and shew kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing. They should put me into the dungeon. He didn't say, my wicked brothers sold me to slavery. He didn't say, Mrs. Potiphar accused me of something that I did not do. He said, I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and I am here, and I have done nothing wrong. But another 2 years go by, and the chief butler forgets about Joseph. Imagine the person who interpreted your dream, and just like he said he would, it happened. Okay? He gets freed from prison. He goes back into handing Pharaoh his cup. But he forgets about him. And when you read this passage, you think to yourself, what an ungrateful person. He interpreted a dream. The least he can do is mention him to Pharaoh so he can be liberated. But why wasn't he liberated? Because that was not the plan of God. He had to wait some more time. We think it's about 11 years from the moment he was taken as a slave to this point. 11 years. But then Pharaoh had a dream. If the butler would have mentioned Joseph to Pharaoh, he possibly would have liberated him. And he wouldn't gone back as a slave or gone back to Jacob's, whatever the family was at. But that was not God's plan. When we see Pharaoh, he had a dream. But nobody in Egypt could interpret. So the purpose was for Joseph to remain in the dungeons. And then he had to interpret Pharaoh's dream and become the prime minister of Egypt. The dream was this. There's 7 cows well-fleshed and 7 cows ill-fleshed. And the 7 cows ill-fleshed will eat the 7 cows that were well-fleshed. Okay, the fat cows will get eaten by the skinny cows, in the term that you and I can understand. And then he had nobody to interpret it. And Joseph, the butler, remembered, oh, there's a man in the dungeons that he interpreted my dream. And just as he said, it came to pass. So they brought him. They cleaned him up, brought him into Pharaoh. Joseph says the 7 fat cows are the 7 years of abundance. The 7 ill-fleshed cows are 7 years of famine. If you save enough on the 7 years of abundance, you will be able to survive. If not, you're all going to die. We are going to die. And then we see this man that went from the pit to the Ishmaelites, to Potiphar's house, to prison, rise to power the way that only God can do. It's a lot more, but we have an enemy, which is